blog was about the criminalisation of looked after children and responses to offending in residential childcare, and the interface, I suppose, between efforts to effect change in one area of the care system or in one approach to practice, and the potential for unintended consequences on other areas of practice. So when I wrote the blog, CYCJ had already undertaken a sort of programme of work that initially started as research and then moved to practice development, support and improvement work that really focused on responses to offending in residential childcare. That work had a sort of dual aim, I suppose, of reducing unnecessary police contact. So in an effort to tackle what we know is the disproportionate criminalisation, or what we believe is the disproportionate criminalisation of care experienced children and young people. And why I say what we believe is because we don't really have good quality data around about that. But secondly, sort of recognising that where police contact does need to take place and is the appropriate response, trying to ensure that's done in a really thoughtful and considered manner, and by the workers who are making that decision about police contact, but also ensuring that children are supported through that initial period of police contact, and then going forward are supported through any outcomes of that involvement. So in my blog, and I spoke about the fact that the work we had undertaken, often we heard how complex it was and how complex responding to offending in residential childcare was. But we often heard that there was this real close interrelation with restraint. So what we heard was that often restraint was deemed to almost be a second last resort, whereas police contact was the option of last resort. So the two areas of work being so sort of inherently linked. And we also heard a lot about what were the factors that could reduce the likelihood of police contact taking place. And I suppose now so we spoke about then if there was any sort of change in practice in one area, because we're working in a complex system like the care system is, change in one area of practice, albeit however well-intentioned or right that change was, would then impact on other parts of the care system and could impact in practice in those areas. So we spoke about almost the risk of unintended consequences, and while we might have aims to reduce unnecessary police contact or reduce the use of restraint or other forms of coercive holding, that actually by doing one you might impact on the other. And that wasn't to say that we shouldn't affect change, because absolutely those dual aims are really important. And I suppose even more so now we've got a mandate from the Independent Care Review that we need to affect change in both of those areas. But we need to just be alert to what is the impact of change in one area and another. Through our work, we also heard a lot about the factors that can help. So Laura Strathclyde had in her CERT conference spoke about the sort of conditions that were needed to prevent or reduce the use of restraint. And we similarly found a lot of overlapping factors that were sort of conditions that could help staff to make responses to offending that were thoughtful and considered. So they were things like shared understanding, they were things like trauma-informed practice, relationship-based practice, understanding kids, supporting the workforce development, this whole sort of raft of range of different factors. Again, all of which tie into the Independent Care Review findings and the recommendations of the promise. So even though we're 2 years on, I suppose the mandate and the necessity to do all of these things has become even more pressing and even more required and expected, and to be on that journey of change. So I suppose some of the messages from that, I suppose, remain true for the context of change that we find ourselves in now.